Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the podcast. And this is episode 4 of Living Faith and Doing Justice. And today I am excited for you to meet Father Tim McCabe. He is a Jesuit priest, and he's also the CEO of the Pope Francis Center. Now, if you remember from episode 1, or if you listened to episode 1, we talked a little bit about Pope Francis Center and how it got its start here at Saints Peter and Paul Jesuit Church. But Father Tim talks about what they have been doing over the last several years, some of the new projects that they've been doing, and just their investment into ending chronic homelessness. We probably could talk a lot longer about chronic homelessness, but just hearing what that they're doing, and I especially appreciated their emphasis and their focus on being trauma informed in the way that they do their program there. And so I encourage you to check out their website and look at ways that you can support them. In the meantime, I hope that you will enjoy this episode, that it will inspire you, encourage you, educate you, and maybe even validate some of the things that you believe. And we will see you at the end. You talk about like your own background and how this came on your heart to be a part of this. But if obviously you came in, the warming center had started first, but
Right.
so just you share a little bit about your own background and then maybe how the Pope Francis Center got started and then where you kind of came in and took up the mantle.
Sure. So grew up in Ferndale. Very influenced as a young adult by the Catholic worker community here in Detroit and the Detroit Peace community. Very formative years for me. And then I did some humanitarian aid in El Salvador during the wars in the late 80s. And so I met the Jesuits down there and very impressed by the men that I met and decided I wanted to be educated in a Jesuit school. So I came back and worked on my degree at UDM. After that, I was hired to be the director of the Jesuit Volunteer Corps. So I spent 12 years running the Midwest region for that program and kind of fell in love with the Jesuit spirituality and was doing a lot of reading of their documents. And so I was raising my daughter at the time, so religious life wasn't an option. But I really loved and really began to incorporate their spirituality around, it's how I prayed, it's how I understood the world. So when my daughter went away to college and she was on her own, I decided to pursue the Jesuits. So I joined them in 2005. I was ordained in 2015.
Wow.
This was my first assignment as a Jesuit priest, and I'm back in the city that I love, doing the work that I love. So I'm very blessed to have been missioned here.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't realize you entered the, clergy later in life. So that's exciting. I'm adult convert to Christianity, so
Wonderful.
so that anyway, it resonates with me.
Yeah.
So I know that the Pope Francis Center actually started as the warming center at Saints Peter and Paul Jesuit. And then had it already become the Pope Francis Center when you came on, or you had a hand in that?
Yeah, I renamed it, or we renamed it as our team shortly after I arrived there. Yeah. So it had started almost 40 years ago now, I think.
Wow. Yeah.
Started as a ministry of the St. Peter and Paul's by Bob Hartigan was the pastor at the time, and Father Hartigan noticed guys sheltering against the building during a winter storm, and he opened up the doors and brought them in and threw on a pot of coffee, and that act of kindness started this ministry of the church, which has lasted like almost 4 decades now. So,
wow.
It was a pretty small operation, and then, but before I got there, Lydia Mayola and I think a group, Rachel Brennan was part of the work of the uh, of the warming center, and they had received a huge grant from the UAW Ford Fund to remodel the lovely room area where the
Right.
church offices were at that time. So they moved the offices upstairs and they remodeled and put in a commercial kitchen and showers and bathrooms and laundry. So
Yeah.
the rest is history.
So that UAW grant, so that came right before, or
Right before I
right before
yeah,
you arrived.
yeah,
Okay. Um, so so you came in right at that time, and what a great transition time for you to come on staff when everything is just kind of like you had that momentum, right?
right.
Um, so once you came on staff, then how long was it before you started dreaming, you and your team started dreaming about things like the Bridge Center?
I think it was about a year. You know, we were, what I loved about what we were doing at St. Pierre Paul was the kind of compassionate, radical love that was being offered to the people that came to the door. There was no sign up sheets. There was nothing asked of anyone except to behave while they're in our building. And then they were able to have whatever they wanted,
Right.
yeah, whatever we were providing. So sorry about that.
It's okay.
So, um, but it wasn't changing folks in their situation. It was simply
Right.
more transactional, certainly saving lives by providing medical care and food and the things that we're providing, but it wasn't really changing things. So the city started talking about addressing homelessness in a significant way. And I just basically called the folks that were in the mayor's office working on it. And I said, I'd love a seat at the table if they're serious about
Right.
really addressing ending homelessness in the city. So Arthur Jemison was the head of housing and revitalization at the time, and he came down, I think the next day, and met with me, and he started talking about this gap in services for folks who are
Right.
chronically homeless, and that would be the majority of people we see on a daily basis. So we said, well, I said infamously, well, uh, if housing is what we need, let's just build it. How hard can it be? I found out. I tell people I had no gray hair when I started this project.
Right.
But we started imagining what would it look like. And so, I started doing some studies around to see if there was a real gap in services and something we could help with. And then I went around the country and I looked at 27 different programs in 11 different
Right.
cities. And I started to research best practices and who was most effective in treating homelessness and what they were doing. So I came back and started working with the architect, and you're sitting in the 10 years later, the result of that study and the work. Yeah.
Right. Wow. So at the day center, you do have, like you said, you have more immediate needs. Obviously, they get fed, and there's laundry services and showers, and then they bring in clinics, different kinds of clinics. So the Bridge Center, um, how like what's it's like the next step. So what is it about how is it structured so that it's helping them to move to that next step of because you've had some people graduate, right?
Right. We've had four, I think, so far since we've
Okay.
been open in September. So,
That's not even a year, so
yeah. So we have 40 studio apartments here where folks can live and transition from the streets into living. So it's a trauma-informed approach to treating homelessness. So, we're recognizing trauma in its various forms, and then we do a full physical, and we have a medical clinic on the campus. So we have a doctor and nurses that address the physical needs. We have a psychiatrist here that, does evaluations and really helps with medications and things like that. And then a curriculum of things to help them be successful. So, emotional intelligence, job skills, readiness, life skills. How do you live indoors after you've lived on the streets for
right.
sometimes decades? Learning to re-enter into this kind of environment of indoor living. And so it's all built, the building is built with a trauma-informed approach. The hallways are wider than normal, a lot of natural light, a lot of colors, all the colors are trauma-informed. So it's a place built to help this specific population transition off the streets. And when they're ready and they feel like they're ready, they will leave here and we get them into permanent housing.
I think that's so important, right? To have that trauma informed. Um, it's insightful. I'm glad you share that because I think there are a lot of people that think, well, if you just give them a place to live and throw them in there, they'll be fine. And I know Chris and I have talked about different stories. So can you maybe just share a little bit? Like, I think there's a lot of people who don't understand the psychological transition that has to take place between living on the street and then living indoors in like a bed and
Right.
yeah.
So I tell people it would be as hard for us to go live out on the streets as it is for them to come indoors. It's a major transition in the lifestyle. Like they are in survival mode, every waking hour and part of their sleep. And they are, having to be constantly aware of their environment. They're dealing with their own traumas and stuff. So you've got a lot of issues that they're working through. Um, Mental illness and addiction are obviously the most common presenting issues. But there's a lot going on and it's very individualized. And that's what I insisted on this program was to make sure that it's individualized care, that everyone's story is different, everybody's trauma is different.
Right.
We got to treat them as an individual and not try to cookie cut or template the approach. And everybody gets their own caseworker and their own case assessment, and they're here for as long as they feel like they need to be here. And and we do what we can to help them kind of heal from a lot of that. A lot of it has to do with just the team here really loving the folks that come here and really, it's a really uh, kind, compassionate environment. And for a lot of folks, that's the first time they've ever experienced that. So,
Right.
when people first get here, we'll see them like just wolfing down food in the cafeteria. They'll just like three helpings at every meal, and they're just because they're used to being in that survival mode.
Right.
And then over weeks, they start slowing down, and you just watch them relax, and
Right.
they're safe, and they know that they don't have to keep hoarding the food. They can just eat slowly and with
Right.
more proportional amounts of food. That's one real side, but they're also laughing. They come in and they're kind of emotionally closed off, and then over time you see them loosen up and they're walking taller and they're laughing and joking around with the other guys. They're building a community here.
Right. That's that's interesting that you said that about the food. I have a friend who was extremely neglected and was put in foster care at 5. And she was fortunate that she was adopted or quickly because she was so young. But her adopted parents said that she would hide food all the time under her bed because they never had enough. A
Right.
lot of times they would there because there were so many kids, they might find a loaf of bread and they were all in the room sharing it and eating it. Um, so yeah, that to shut off that part of the brain that says scramble for everything, and learn how to slow down and um, yeah,
Feel safe.
feel safe,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. I mean, yeah, they probably not had a safe place ever, if but definitely not for a long time. Um, so you have a few guests, which I think that's fabulous. Anybody to have something to have 4 graduates before you're even at the 1 year mark is a lot. Um, so we talk about what that looks like for, because obviously, I'm going to guess that they had some advantages on some other people. But what does that look like for them to officially graduate?
hmm
Yeah.
So they've gone through the program, then they've worked with their caseworker, and they've decided together that they're ready to live independently. And then, while they're here, we're working through the housing system to find them housing. So, um, like 3 of the 4 that just left, they all ended up in the same building.
Oh, that's kind of nice.
Yeah, it is really nice. So they're kind of a little bit of a community unto themselves. So, they we work with the city and with the different housing providers to make sure that we get them a safe, humane place to live. And there's not enough of that. And that's
Mm-mm.
one of the big problems is that we're facing right now is, people are ready to go, but there's no place for them to go. So
Right.
we're uh, try to manage that and try to find ways to provide more housing,
Right.
permanent housing. Yeah,
Right. And even temporary, like overnight shelters. I think didn't one of the shelters in Detroit shut down recently?
yeah, because of some kind of a flooding issue. You
Oh,
know.
got it.
Yeah, but there's definitely not enough shelter beds either on the other side of this.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. So do you have, I guess now you've kind of, I don't want to say you've arrived, right? You never arrive when you're doing nonprofit work, but you've, you're coming up on your 1 year anniversary. Have you started making plans for like 3 to 5 years for other projects, or are you kind of gonna run at a certain pace for a little while? Like what are your plans going forward?
Well, I mean, we're very concerned about the lack of affordable housing, and so my board and I have begun to explore ways that we might work with a developer or do what we can to kind of get involved in the permanent support housing world and make sure that when our graduates are ready, there's a place for them to go. So
Right.
that would probably be phase two is, well, phase two is stabilizing financially and
Right.
make sure that we're good going forward, but then to see if there's a way that we can help with affordable housing issues.
Well, I mean, obviously we'll put the your website and your giving links in the show notes so people can partner with you. You have, because I think you have a couple of ongoing programs that people can participate in, right? Um, your sustainability um, donors that
Oh,
contribute
right. Yeah,
repeatedly.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
The Empowerment Village Riverland.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So everybody has their own
Giving
term.
Society. Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, so your empowerment village. I know you have the gala is coming up
Hmm.
in when is that?
May 8th.
In May. Okay, so people can, even if they aren't going to the gala, they can still donate to it,
Yeah.
right? Any other ways people can?
Our website has volunteer opportunities. So if people wanted to volunteer, there's plenty of work. I always say we all need to work together to solve this problem. And so it
Right,
takes all of us, the church, the business community, the nonprofit community, the city, all working together on the
right.
solution. But you mentioned the gala. It's really a fun event. We're on Ford Field right
Oh,
now where the
nice.
Lions play, and it's suits and sneakers, so everybody wears tennis shoes with their dress up clothes, and it's a fun event. And being on the field is really, especially now that the Lions are doing so well.
Right.
Yeah,
Maybe this year, give it an extra blessing, would you?
yeah,
Maybe next
will
maybe this
do.
year. Uh, so yeah, and they can volunteer at the day center and then also at the bridge center, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. And I'm guessing there are other ways to interview. Matter of fact, I just interviewed one of your board members, Letty Azar.
Oh,
So
great woman. Yeah,
yeah, she's pretty fascinating. Um, so your board is that oversees everything, right? It sees oversees all parts of it, the Pope Francis Center.
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So you don't have like separate boards or anything. Okay. Um, so obviously I don't always know all the questions to ask because you're in this every day, like you're doing this every day. So is there anything I didn't ask that you really want people to know and want to share with people?
Well, you kind of saw the movement from emergency shelter to
Right.
our center where they come for food and showers and laundry and medical care, and then hopefully they move here and stabilize and get off of the street. So and then from here into permanent housing. So it's a people have their own understanding of what it means to be homeless and why people are homeless, and that's it's a complicated issue. And the stereotype that folks are lazy and don't want to come indoors is so far from reality. I mean,
Right.
every one of our guys here is begging for work. How do I get, so we're doing resume building, and we're practicing calling for interviews, and we're helping them find entry-level jobs or
Right.
jobs that they're ready for. But they want to be off the streets. They want to be living, you know, self-sufficiently and independently. And, you know, it's a, it, but, they've had traumas and hardships that we can't even imagine living through. And so this is a great place where, you know, they say love heals, and boy, you can really see it in this place actually happening. I'm so blessed to have the team of volunteers and staff that just, are incredibly compassionate and, really want to see our guys succeed. And that makes all the difference. I often say to people, the thing that keeps us from falling into homelessness is family and community, whatever, that's our safety net. And for most of these folks, they don't have that safety net. So we become that, we become a family. And we talk here all the time about the Pulpfrance Center family. You're part of a family now.
Right.
And that, it matters.
It does. It makes a huge difference. They say that, I mean, still today, sociologists will tell us that the number one resource you need to move from one economic status to the next is a community.
Yeah,
You have to have a community support system.
that's right. Yeah.
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 So, oh my goodness. Well, I'm excited about all the stuff that you're doing, and of course, I get to work with Ben and Chris and some of the others during the week at the day center. And anyway, we'll be praying for your gala and all that
Hey,
stuff. So,
come join us.
yeah, thanks so much. Awesome.